Hi, I'm Hannah from 21st Century KY, and today we're going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Even though I am currently a reading interventionist, my favorite thing that I have taught in my 15 years as an elementary school teacher is kindergarten. And when I taught kindergarten, I had to learn some lessons myself. And the number one thing I learned was that there is an integral part of kindergarten curriculum that has been there since kindergarten was first developed. And so many teachers tend to put it aside, and so many administrators see this topic as a four-letter word. But I'm here to dispel that, and I'm here to empower teachers and let them know that that four-letter word, P-L-A-Y, play, is quite possibly the most important part of the kindergarten day, even in the 21st century. We know that when kindergarten first began years ago, it was about bridging that gap between home and school and preparing students for the start of first grade, which is really when academic learning began. Kindergarten, though, has become, the phrase has been coined, the new first grade. And a lot of the academics and a lot of the content is backing backwards into kindergarten. And with the advent of Common Core standards, kindergarten teachers are feeling the crunch to make sure and get the academics in there, to get kids as advanced as they possibly can in reading and math. And so some things have to go by the wayside. Unfortunately, because play is not something you can measure on a test, because play doesn't have a finite lesson plan that has observable I can statements and objectives for just anybody who walks in, it has become sort of the scapegoat, and we have let play go by the wayside in many kindergarten programs across the United States. And when I first started teaching kindergarten, I was ready to get in there, implement my standards, and really downplay play. It was not a part of my daily schedule when I first started teaching kindergarten. In fact, I didn't even make it a priority, make room for it in my classroom. And boy, was I wrong. I found that my students didn't have the stamina to make it through the day and to get through the lessons that I had planned. And I found that they didn't have any sort of creative outlet. They didn't have a way to authentically learn about social skills, and I was just missing something big time, even though my students were performing pretty well on tests and they were learning the content, and I was covering my standards, just like a good teacher should. I knew that something was missing. So now the question has become to play or not to play. I, as a graduate student, took a research course at Murray State University where I earned all of my degrees. Thank goodness I live in a college town. And in that research course, I got to choose an educational topic, and I chose to research about play because I felt like I was doing a pretty good job teaching kindergarten, but like I said, I had something that I was missing, and I had sort of been encouraged by some of my peer teachers that maybe play is what I was missing. So I did a pretty good bit of research and surprisingly found that, or I was surprised to find that play is a pretty hot topic. If you're not a kindergarten teacher, there's a lot of research out there that supports play in kindergarten. But then there are also a lot of things that point to the unnecessariness, if that's a word, of play in kindergarten in the 21st century as well. So I started to dig through all of this, and I found some main points given by both sides. Some cons to play in the classroom are that it takes time. Clearly, in order to give children the opportunity to learn through play, they have to have, research shows, upwards of 30 to 45 to 60 minutes of sustained play in order to gain anything from it. And that's because good play takes planning. So there has to be a certain amount of time where they're planning what they're going to do and then executing it. Just like we would do for anything else, kids need that sustained time with play for it to be meaningful. So a 5 or 10 minute here or there is really not going to help kids. And if you think about it, the time it takes to get it out and the time it takes to put it up can really be taxing on your schedule. So, some teachers see that there's just not time for good play to go on in their daily schedule. Another thing is that play isn't necessarily standards based. It takes a lot of work for the teacher to make play pair up with core standards. And so when kids are just turned loose with toys, they do learn from it, but because it's not directly tied to standards necessarily, and because teachers haven't been mindful ahead of time for providing those opportunities, it doesn't really count as standards-based in the eyes of an administrator. If you imagine a principal coming in and it's pretty much a free-for-all, they're not likely to see how you're connecting that to your standards. So that would be a negative on play in the kindergarten classroom. Another would be the argument that children are capable of more. In the 21st century, we're seeing that our kids can multitask, our kids are great with technology, our kids are developing and maturing at a faster rate because of the way that they interact with the world. They're also more knowledgeable about things around the world because the world is at their fingertips most of the time. And so there's this notion that they're capable of more. And maybe if we're focusing more time on things like media literacy and media creativity, that would be a better way to suit the needs of our current students. And another con would be that the gains from play are not measurable. We as teachers know that we live in a quantitative world and there need to be numbers attached to what we do, and we need to be able to show growth in those numbers. And unfortunately, gains from play are typically formative. They're typically to do with social skills and behavioral skills, and that's not necessarily something that we can tag a number to, and it's certainly not something that's going to pop up on a standardized test. So that might be another argument for not making time for play in the kindergarten classroom. But there are a whole lot of arguments for the positives of having kindergarten play as part of having play as part of the kindergarten schedule. And the first would just be that young children learn through play. They learn through experiencing hands-on, and what better way to increase student engagement and to increase ownership of learning than to put them in the driver's seat. And for young kids, letting them play is putting them in the driver's seat where they're making the choices and they're learning through the process of playing, and they're also bringing in their own personal experiences, and so how they're learning about themselves and others through those interactions and through those learning explorations. It impacts all areas of growth. When children play, they're working on social skills, they're working on leadership skills, they are working on speaking and listening skills, and that is an area of Common Core. They're often working on engineering and technology standards. Those Legos and require some engineering sometimes, and if they're working on computers and iPads and they're creating things, then they are bringing in technology. It also works in math and writing and reading if you provide those experiences for them. Playing in the shopping center will involve money and math and counting and communicating, and reading a menu in the restaurant center requires reading, and creating it requires writing. So play, when you think about it, can really cover all areas of growth for a child. And when you integrate all those at the same time, it becomes even more powerful. Children need peer interaction. Nobody likes to sit and get all day long. I am a teacher. School is what I do. It's all I've known since I was 5 years old. But I do not like to sit and get and have somebody feed stuff to me all the time. I can't learn that way. I can handle it for a max of maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours if the content is really great and if I'm given a break. And I am a grown-up. Imagine the mind of a 5 and a 6 year old. They cannot sit there while we feed them stuff and really and truly learn and take it in. Most of them. Some of them have longer attention spans than others, but child development just shows us that they can't sit there. They need to be involved, and they need to be involved with each other through the process of learning. And using play throughout the day and within the day can actually improve their ability to focus on a task. When kids are given that downtime where they're in charge, where they're making choices, where they are socially interacting, it resets their attention span. And so when you bring that group back together for, a large group learning experience or an explicit learning experience, they are more apt to learn because they've been given the break, so to speak. Like I said, I've got to have a break. I've got to have a little candy bar, a drink of water, go to the restroom, and check my phone if I'm going to have to sit through a 3-hour professional development meeting. And I'm sure teachers and parents and administrators are the same way. Well, our kids are just like that too, only on a much smaller scale. So when we provide them that time to sort of unwind and direct their own learning, then they're going to benefit much more when we draw them back in and we need them to focus on what it is we have to teach them. So, where did I go from here? I did all this research. I found these pros and cons. The research showed me, and my experience as a mother to 3 showed me that what I was missing in my schedule was play. And I decided, because I am very, very standards driven in my instruction, I needed to make some big decisions about how I was going to incorporate play. It could not be haphazard, and it could not be a free-for-all if it was going to work for me. So I decided on a few things that I was going to make sure and include. Number 1, I was going to have a balanced approach. I wanted to have all kinds of teaching throughout my day. So my students experience small guided reading groups in a Daily 5 type organization, if you're familiar with that book by the 2 sisters. I wanted to make sure that my students had some heterogeneous groupings for learning centers that were cross-curricular and integrated the arts along with math and reading and science and social studies. I wanted to make sure that my students had some explicit instruction time on phonics and handwriting, because I just need to blatantly show them some of those things. I wanted to make sure my students had time in a large group to experience literature together. And so we had some core instructional time. So I wanted to make sure that I had brought in explicit instruction, large group instruction, small group instruction that's skills-based and heterogeneously grouped. But I also wanted to have play where they were making their choices. So I had to take a really hard look at my schedule, and I had to see, and I had to decide what was it that I could do away with. And what happened was, when I decided to make play a priority, I really thought long and hard about exactly what I was going to do during math time. And if math time needed to be cut by 5 or 10 minutes, then I was going to have to make what time I took work. That meant a lot of training about routines and procedures, and that meant that my lessons were going to have to be tied directly to the standards, and our activities were going to have to be exactly what I needed to formatively or summatively assess or provide independent or group practice, and my time had to be well spent. I couldn't burn an entire 2 hours on math because I had other things on my list of priorities. The same was true for reading. I couldn't drag my reading groups out forever and a day. I really had to think what was most important. And when I think about what is most important in my instruction, I think about my standards. I go to those standards, and then I develop lessons that are going to execute those standards. And then I try to think of the best ways to present that information to my students or provide them opportunities to learn that. And I just have to get really focused and really serious. What that meant was some things had to go by the wayside. We didn't necessarily spend an hour painting our handprints for every holiday and season. But when I thought about it, what did those handprint paintings have to do with my standards? Probably nothing. And what did those handprint paintings help my students achieve? Probably nothing other than following directions and washing their hands. So when I really thought long and hard about the things I was choosing to do or might choose to do, and I really tried to align everything with the standards, it was very freeing. And I looked at my schedule in a new way. And I decided that play was going to be a priority. In order to make it a priority, I had to spend the rest of my time wisely to cover what I needed to cover. I also decided that play in my classroom was going to be well structured and choreographed. It was not going to be willy-nilly, all the baby dolls don't have any clothes on, and the Barbie's hair is frazzled, and they're building goodness knows what out of Legos, and arguing over the trucks as they race them out the door. That was not going to happen in my classroom. In fact, that's what I didn't like about play when I first started teaching kindergarten. I just felt out of control. And so I decided that my play opportunities were going to be like my instructional opportunities, tied to the standards. And when I go back and think about what standards I want to accomplish through play, I think about speaking and listening standards. I think about some real world math applications in those anchor standards for math. I think about college and career readiness standards for ELA and the things that I want my kids to be able to do and experience and pretend about the real world so that they're able to make connections with what they're learning. And when I thought about those standards, and then I wove in the themes of the seasons and the holidays and other activities around the school, I was able to hone in on a focus for the play opportunities I provided my kids. And then I had to plan them and vary the opportunities that I put out in my classroom over the course of the year. I also wanted to embed student choice and creativity in my play choices, or in my play opportunities. And so through that, I made sure to provide open-ended activities where they could create, make things their own. If they wanted to build upon some activity in some way, I did everything I could to provide them the means. If they needed my Scotch tape to create something, buddy, they could have my Scotch tape. If they needed the stapler with safety, they could use my stapler. If they suggested some toy and I could find it in my kids' playroom, I was bringing it up and we were putting it in. They were really an integral part to the planning and to the growth over time of those play centers after I sort of set up that structured opportunity. So what happened when I included play? The last year I taught kindergarten, before I became a reading interventionist, I made play a priority. We played almost every single day, and we had at least one opportunity a week where play lasted upwards of 45 minutes to an hour. And I was amazed at the growth I saw in my students. Every single student made gains over the course of that year, and not just little gains, measurable gains. And every single student was benchmarked on our reading and math assessments at the end of the year. I couldn't boast that before when I was so standards and academic driven. But when I provided the opportunities for my kids to relax and reset their attention span, they learned academics better. When I integrated what they were learning in academics along with their social development and their behavioral development, they learned at a deeper level. When I gave them ownership over their learning and over their play, their leadership skills just flew through the roof. Those kids are now in second grade. And when I see them walking down the hall and when I hear comments from their teachers, they are still pretty well-rounded kids. And you know, if you're a kindergarten teacher, that's what you want. Number one, you want kids to love school. And who wouldn't love coming to school and getting to play? So check that off my list. Number two, you want kids to sustain their growth. You want them to grow in all areas so that they're primed and ready for the rest of their elementary or school career, because the kindergarten teacher and the preschool teacher are first. And so I feel confident that those good test scores that my principal was so proud of and their continued success in first and second grade and is 100% attributed to the fact that I worked very hard to provide those opportunities for play. And in providing those opportunities for play, my academic opportunities were much more focused and my time was much better spent throughout the day in activities that address their needs. So do 21st century kids need to play? Resounding yes. Of course they do. Even in 2016, a 5-year-old is still a 5-year-old, and there's some things that don't change about child development. So now that I've put it out there and I've fired you up about adding play to your kindergarten schedule, I'm going to have a series of posts over the coming weeks about how I incorporated it. I'm going to include a planner on how to choose topics and activities for every month of the school year, and I'm going to let you see my plan and how I incorporated the standards in with my play activities, some resources that I bought and used, some things from the Dollar Tree that my kids found amazing that sort of revolutionized their play. I am so excited to share with you how play worked for my kindergarten classroom, in the hopes that you'll be able to take that leap and put a focus back on play in your kindergarten, because it will be the best thing you ever did. It'll be the best learning opportunity for your students. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say it'll be the best learning opportunity for you too. Thanks a lot for joining me today, and I look forward to sharing more with you about play in the future.